So now let's move on to discuss epoxidation. Epoxidation is a reaction where we're going to take a carbon-carbon double bond, an alkene, and transform it to a carbon-carbon single bond containing an oxygen in a three-membered ring. That is an epoxide functional group. So this reaction is known as epoxidation. And it will be facilitated by some reagent known as an oxidizing agent that donates an oxygen, as shown by this symbol. So the electrophile for epoxidation of an alkene is a peroxy acid, which is some alkyl or aryl chain bound to a carbonyl with an oxygen and an oxygen-oxygen bond with a terminal acidic proton. And the important part about this reaction is that this reactant is that this oxygen-oxygen bond is very weak. And the oxygen source that ends up being the oxygen of the epoxide, that direct oxidant, is this terminal oxygen here that breaks off from the rest of the molecule. So this reaction is concerted. So there's one transition state, and there are no intermediates. So this is in category C. It is an oxidation because we're going to increase the number of CO bonds. And any peroxy acid, which can be written in many different ways, is a good oxidant because it contains a weak oxygen-oxygen bond.